Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for this, our last ELNET Zoom call of this year. We have a lot to discuss with you today. Towards the end of the session, we'll also give you an update and summary of our campaign for this year and our plans for the coming year. You know that ELNET has been very intensively involved, all of us and all of the offices, in making sure that European delegations have the opportunity, European leaders and politicians and legislators have the opportunity to go to the south in Israel with our teams, with the IDF, to meet with the families, to see firsthand the atrocities, to remind ourselves what this is all about, especially at a time during the military campaign where there's much tragedy, there are some mistakes. You know about the fact that the IDF tragically and mistakenly shot down 3 Israeli hostages a few days ago. It's tremendously painful, but it's also important to remember that we're dealing with a terror organization in a fortress-like situation where the entire civilian population, theirs, as well as Israeli hostages, they've embedded themselves. This is part of the battlefield. Let's remember that they poured over the border, massacred 1,200 Israeli civilians, men, women, and children, and then retreated back into their own fortress-like environment. You know that the IDF has uncovered at least 800 tunnels, destroyed 500. You've seen with your own eyes how large and strategic the infrastructure is there. That's where the world money went, the international support. Instead of going to the population, it went underground to support this horrific military situation, guerrilla-like situation that we're in right now. So it's not always going to be easy. There will be weeks that will be very depressing, very difficult, but there's no doubt that Israel needs to continue to do what is necessary to protect its borders, and it is not alone. And this is what we need to remember as we come to the close of 2023. Europe has been with Israel strategically in this war like never before. Joan, I'm sure you can point to that firsthand. The support that Israel receives from countries like Germany, France, the UK, whether or not we agree with every statement of every politician or every op-ed, strategically, these are the countries that are allies of Israel, side by side with the United States. And this is important that it continue. And this is where the work of ELNET will be critical, even more so in the coming months than in the previous 3 since October 7th. So without further ado, we have many fronts, both the war on the ground, the home front in Israel, and of course, the situation of global anti-Semitism, both on campuses and in the streets, both in Europe and in the United States, that we'll discuss today. So without further ado, I am honored to pass this on to Joan Ryan, who is our very able director in ELNET UK, to take the floor and introduce our speaker. Joan, please.
Thanks, David. I think I've just done something to this camera. There we go. Okay. Thank you, David. And yes, it is true. We have had strong support across the House of Commons and the House of Lords for Israel's right to defend itself in this situation. It's my great pleasure and my honour to introduce this evening David Hirsh. David is the academic director and the CEO of the London Centre for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism, as well as a senior lecturer at Goldsmiths University of London. David pioneered a sociological account of contemporary anti-Zionism and its relationship to anti-Semitism. And he's worked on crimes against humanity, totalitarianism, democracy, and populism. He teaches core sociology, criminology, crimes against humanity, and human rights courses at both undergraduate and master's level. He was central in building the Engage network and website that led to opposition to the proposal for an academic boycott of Israel in 2004. And this action fueled the fight against anti-Semitic politics in Britain, especially on campus. He's a leading critic of the ideas underpinning the Corbyn movement and has been instrumental in shaping the democratic and Jewish responses in Britain and further afield to anti-Semitism. He has a global reputation as a scholar and as a leader of the fight against anti-Semitism. And it's particularly appropriate at this point when many people have been absolutely outraged by what the presidents of Penn University, MIT, and Harvard had to say or wouldn't say at the Congressional Committee hearings. So David, you're very welcome. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. I thought I might start by talking to you about the centre that you have founded. I mean, we all know there's been a huge increase in anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism since the Hamas attack on Israel on October the 7th, and in BDS activities and activities on campus. But it's not as if any of this wasn't happening before, just not at this scale. So you have seen much of this coming into our universities and onto campus. And I thought you might tell us a little bit about the London Centre for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism, which you founded, and why you felt the UK needed an academic institution like this. And I wondered if you would also address, do academics lead or do they follow? Is it the academics who've led to this upsurge on our campuses in anti-Semitism and BDS, or is it the other way around? David.
Joan, thanks very, very much for your warm welcome. People should know that Joan Ryan is also, well, absolutely one of the very leaders of the fight against anti-Semitism in British public life and has been for some time. So let me tell you a little bit about the London Centre. I think everybody knows that there is a problem of anti-Semitism on campus. Everybody knows. Everyone who's interested, everyone who is in the world that opposes anti-Semitism, everybody knows. But people don't know what to do about it. And people actually, it's very, very difficult to know what to do about it. So what we are doing by institutionalizing the London Centre for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism is we're saying that we as academics have a particular way in to these discussions on campus. And we do know what to do about it. We speak the language of these guys. If they think that they are Marxists, we understand Marx better. And if they think they're critical theorists, we understand critical theory better. And if they think they are intersectionalists, we understand intersectionalism better. So very importantly, as I say, everybody knows there's a problem, but not everybody is in a position to do something about it. And fighting anti-Semitism on campus begins at the very highest level. In other words, it begins on the level of academic output, of books and academic papers. So if people want to engage with anti-Semitic thinking on campus, they have to engage by writing or by facilitating the writing of books and papers. And what that means is fundamentally research funding. Now, research is a funny word because people think it means, well, you know, we want to sit around and find some things out before we can do anything. But that's not what we mean by research. What we mean by research is we need to give people the time and the space to sit down and to write high-level academic outputs that engage with anti-Semitic thinking. There's a campaign to kind of they call it to decenter the Holocaust from genocide studies, for example. The argument being that genocide studies was set up basically by Zionism and by Israel in order to put the Holocaust at the center of ideas about violence, about large-scale violence. And what we need to do is decenter it and bring back the real structure, which is the crimes of European imperialism over the last 3 or 4 centuries. Now, the book that makes the argument I just mentioned is that thick, and it has 1,000 footnotes, and it is influential, and it presents itself as exciting and sexy and intelligent and radical. So that's like the first thing really, is that we need to find a way to make it possible for academics to do that work, to write a critique of a 1,000-page book, to write the papers, to engage with Judith Butler, to engage with all of the kinds of ideas that we kind of know are threatening, but we aren't really in a place to engage with them. And we think that, in a sense, a lot of other things are firefighting. A lot of things are, you know, we have a crisis here, we have a crisis there. But there's a root problem, and the root problem is that the clever people, the people who lead academia, the people who write the books, the people whose students are taught to love and to idolize, are pushing anti-Semitic thinking. And without taking them on, everything else is much, much more difficult. Joan, if you let me, I will talk and talk and talk. So don't.
Well, let me just move to go back a little bit to what I said in the introduction, you know, about this being very timely and what we saw before the US Congressional Committee, Penn, MIT and Harvard. Do you think British university leaders would have said something similar, would have said, it depends on the context, that to advocate genocide isn't always, you know, would that have happened if that was 3 university leaders here? Because people often ask me, do you have the same problem on campus in your universities and in academic life in the UK as we have in the States?
So I remember very well back in 2011 when Anthony Julius was representing Ronnie Fraser against the University and College Union, which we had all been basically spat out of, at least in terms of the debate about anti-Semitism and boycotts of Israel. And he was putting a lot of questions to the General Secretary of the Union of Academics. And she was kind of saying, no, that's not anti-Semitic. And he would put another situation which was in the evidence. She'd say, no, that's not anti-Semitic. And Anthony got quite kind of frustrated at one point. And he said, if somebody said, if you want to understand the Jews, read Mein Kampf, would that be anti-Semitic? And she said, no, it wouldn't. Not in my union, because my union is an anti-racist union. So we've heard it before. And it's a kind of astonishing way to behave. I think there are all sorts of excuses that the presidents can come up with for their behavior last week. They were concerned not to have rings run around them. They were concerned about the complexity and the ambiguity of slogans like "From the River to the Sea" and slogans like the others that they were asked about. And they were also concerned about the First Amendment and about the pushback that they would get back when they got back onto campus, because they wouldn't get much pushback from Jews. They would get a lot of pushback from people who said, you are pushing forward a Tory stroke Trumpist agenda of prohibiting freedom of speech and freedom of thought and academic freedom on campus. And that's the kind of thing that people are worried about. So any kind of opposition to anti-Semitism really gets all kinds of knee-jerk responses, which is, we know what you're really up to. You're really up to trying to prohibit the criticism of Israel and trying to prohibit standing with the Palestinians against the genocide and the apartheid that they are facing. So everything is turned around. Yes, it could happen in Britain. I think that we have to be accurate. I think there are spaces on campus where anti-Semitic intellectual frameworks are completely normal. They're not the majority of campuses. They are particular disciplines and particular places, but around those spaces where belligerent anti-Semitism is normal, there are many people who kind of think, well, it's kind of all right and it's kind of on the right side. And around them are many people who think, well, this is a matter of freedom of speech and academic freedom, and we know where the threat is coming from. It's coming from Zionism and Trump and the Tories. And around them are administrators, people with power on campus, and their concern is to kind of keep everything running and to protect all of their people. And then there's another layer of people who are afraid to speak out because they're busy doing their work, whatever their work is. And, you know, academics are very self-important about their little arcane areas of work. And the last thing they want is to get denounced as a Zionist or a Trumpist and to become, to have their reputation trashed. And actually, we've seen a lot of that through Jewish studies in America and elsewhere. That Jewish studies is especially concerned to protect its reputation as being part of what I have called the community of the good. And Jewish studies is especially concerned to protect its place in the kind of broad anti-Trump coalition. And of course, the problem with that is that its place is not secure. You know, that very often anyone who raises the issue of anti-Semitism is kind of expelled from that broad liberal left space and is treated as a pariah. So that's part of the background to what we see, even, or perhaps especially in Jewish studies, that one would think that if you fund Jewish studies, you know, families for 3-4 generations, people who did well have given money to Jewish studies, to departments and universities, because they thought in some sense this was kind of good for the Jews. And what has happened under the principle of academic autonomy and academic freedom is that money is now controlled by the academics. And so that money is often going to anti-Zionist professors or professors who are so terrified that they might lose their grip on, you know, ancient Yiddish literature or whatever it is that they specialize in, by saying something political, by saying something which can be shown to be pro-apartheid, pro-genocide, pro-racism, and therefore have their reputation trashed. So think onion rings on campus, not onion rings, onion layers. Think onion layers. And there are very few people who are able and willing to have a proper, serious intellectual discussion about contemporary anti-Semitism. And in Britain, we are kind of protecting our position. We felt that we had to institutionalize our position because we were disappearing. I mean, you know, our mentors were retiring or have died, some of them, and we are unable to bring through young, smart academics who want to study anti-Semitism or who want to address anti-Semitism. There are academics who are pretty sharp, but they earn a living elsewhere, right? They earn a living doing those kind of specialized things that I mentioned. And they talk about anti-Semitism quietly. But there are very, very few people in Britain, and I would venture to say also in America, there are very few people who are professional scholars of contemporary anti-Semitism or professional people who engage with anti-Semitic ideas explicitly at the highest level.
It's really worrying, isn't it? Because I was reading again about David Miller, the person who was considered an eminent lecturer at Bristol University, which is one of our leading universities, who has now obviously been dismissed since 2021. But he prayed in aid the freedom of speech, freedom of academic thought in his arguments, that he was entitled to say things like it's impossible for a Zionist state such as Israel to be non-racist, and that Israel, he accused them of wanting to impose its will all over the world, without in any way seeming to recognise these were tropes. But what really worried me is that there was a letter supporting him that was signed by 300 academics. Now, are you saying that it's the onion layers, that at the core there are hard left anti-Semites, or they might call themselves liberal, I don't know, but the rest are just kind of academically bullied into this to protect their own position?
I think there were more than 300. I think there were 700 or 800 academics who signed the statement in favour of David Miller. There are also whole union branches that have passed motions, and not only to protect him on the basis of his academic freedom, we don't agree with him, but we agree with his right to say it. No, that's not it. It's he is an eminent scholar, and his work is brilliant. There are, I think, 9 people on my campus who signed that. And I mean, people should know that David Miller, since firstly, Bristol fired him, but never really said why, right? Because they didn't have the courage. They didn't have the courage to really say what was going on, what the problem was, how they got into the problem, and what they did about it. They just said, "Oh well, he does some things that violate our codes of conduct," or something like some words like
line with the
So they didn't have the courage to say what was going on. He has in fact sued them for unfair dismissal. The judgment is being awaited, and it's not obvious what the judgment is going to be. He's made an argument in British law to protect anti-Zionism as protected speech.
He's insisting, isn't he, that anti-Zionism isn't anti-Semitism?
That's his argument, yes. I mean, people should understand that since David Miller was fired, he's been working for the Iranian propaganda outfit Press TV. He's been producing about one clear and explicit anti-Semitic video a week in English that go online. He's made one about me. He's made one about the CST. He's made one about all of us. Probably there's one about you, Joan, is there? And you'd have thought then that now you could say, well, look, now we know, now he's working for the Iranian propaganda machine. But that isn't an argument that has particularly worked. And what the truth is about that is that the 9 people at my institution, or 7, or however many there were, who signed in defense of David Miller's work are not afraid of any kind of dent to their reputation or to their anything. They're not afraid. There's no fear of lining up with people like David Miller. And I would also say, I mean, this is a huge issue for the disciplines. He was a sociologist, and he was a well-known and well-respected sociologist. He got, I think he was had a strong position in £400,000 worth of government-funded research money, and the discipline of sociology has said nothing about how did sociology allow this to happen. In fact, if you ask them, or you ask the union, they will say, well, it's a travesty of academic freedom, and it's a witch hunt, and all the rest of it. The other thing about David Miller that's interesting is that he pushes the envelope. So he embraces more and more extreme positions and rhetoric And it's funny because you'd think that, for example, the campaign against the IRA definition of anti-Semitism is a kind of unifying campaign for the broad swathe of people who are, you know, a little bit taken by anti-Semitism. But Miller's not interested in unifying the anti-Semites. He's interested in pushing the envelope and in denouncing half of the anti-Semites for not being anti-Semitic enough, and especially, of course, denouncing the Jewish anti-Semites for not being anti-Semitic enough. So that's another thing that is interesting about David Miller.
To what degree does then, you know, where these lecturers are and the leadership that they're giving, to what degree is that making BDS happen on campus? And I just, you know, we've seen week after week on a Saturday, huge pro-Palestinian marches through London. And we can see that a very large number of those people marching, I mean, one week it was 300,000, so these are massive. And we can see that many of them are under 30 or even under 25. And this is, you know, the hotbed for this is the campus. Is this just the hard left? We know, we can see the placards that student unions, Stop the War, the BDS organisations, Palestine Solidarity Campaign, Socialist Worker, we can see they're all there. But what's opened the door? Is it academic led? Can you stop it? Because there are polls out that show very large numbers on campus now in the US and the UK are anti-Israel and blame Israel now for what's going on and the war against Hamas.
Well, it's a completely mainstream position that there's no real war against Hamas. There's just a war against Palestine or a war against innocent Palestinians that Israel is committing or is preparing to commit genocide. These are completely normal positions, and actually, people don't know anything about what is happening in Gaza. I mean, there is a battle raging in Gaza. You know, Israeli boys and girls are engaging Hamas in battle and are falling and are defending their communities against Hamas and its anti-Semitic totalitarianism. But people don't know that that is going on at all, because if you listened to much of the media coverage, you would just know that really Israel is just bombing and bombarding and killing Palestinian civilians at random. It's doing it in order to punish them. It's doing it in order to turn them against Hamas. It's doing it in order to feed Israeli bloodlust. So what is actually happening is not widely understood at all. I mean, there was, you know, people, it's very, very easy for people to do the vox pops, and they go around when people are chanting from the river to the sea. People go and ask, well, what river are we talking about? What sea are we talking about? Then the chant becomes from Gaza to the sea, and there's a real sense in which the story of conflict between Israel and its neighbors has become a kind of passion play, has become a discourse through which people show you who they are. And they show you how radical they are, and they show you how they are in the community of the good, and they show you that they are courageous to stand up to the Zionist lobby, etc. And there's very little understanding of what actually this is really all about. There's very little understanding of the fact that Gaza was not occupied. There's very little understanding of the huge resources that have gone into Gaza. You know, there are still plenty of rockets and weapons and such like in Gaza, but people talk about the siege that was strangling and starving Gaza. There were, now we can see, you know, huge building materials going into Gaza. And in fact, you know, the siege had in fact ended quite a long time ago. But it's like people don't really know what's going on, and academics are very comfortable making assumptions and teaching the story in a way that doesn't really tally with the reality of events and history. So
Are they able to challenge their students? I mean, do students open this up in the lecture halls? Are they able to challenge, or do lecturers just, you know?
See, my experience actually, maybe counterintuitively, is that my students, and I'm at a university that is well known, has a reputation for being radical and left wing, and you know, there is as much anti-Semitism on my campus as anywhere. Yet I've never had any trouble with students teaching. You know, the overwhelming majority of students are not running around demanding that Israel be, you know, smashed and dismantled and denouncing it. In fact, if you talk about issues in class, you know, students are kind of open and willing to learn. So with all, again, it's the kind of onion layers that there are small cadres of very well organized people, and Jewish anti-Zionism plays a particular role in that, a particular leadership role, and around that is just a kind of becomes a culture, or that people know that they should keep their mouth shut, or people know that these guys are basically on the right side, and people know that you know, if somebody sticks up for Israel, then they are sticking up for fascism. It's all very vague and very general, and there's very little understanding. But you know,
so how do we tackle it? Because it's, you know, the poll in the US shows us that students are not just supporting this generalized notion of Palestinians, they're talking about Hamas.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you know, I wanted to say,
is now being supported by students, young people who don't understand what it is and don't see BDS as something aimed at poisoning their minds and preventing them exercising any academic freedom. So I think what parents are really worried about is, should we just stop sending our kids to university? I think that's a lot of Jewish parents think, you know, why send them there? They feel persecuted. I've had Jewish parents in America say to me that their kids are being turned against Israel, not just on about, you know, non-Jewish kids.
No, I'm well aware. You know, students at my university find me sometimes. I mean, not all of them, but sometimes they find me and they tell me stories about what's been happening to them. You know, in our department, in our university, and they are really, really upsetting. And I mean, I kind of wanted to argue with you about, you know, the problem isn't people being pro-Palestinian. The problem is, as you say, the problem is the excitement around the 7th of October. There were people excited about it, people saying, you know, tweeting, this is what the liberation will look like. And, you know, this shows us that Zionism is paper thin and it can be defeated and smashed. And then the people who don't glory it trivialize it, or they just say, well, it's not important. So the 7th of October is not important. It's just a pretext for Israeli genocide. So, and there are lots and lots of kind of purposeful ambiguity. You know, Free Palestine, for example, like who could argue with Free Palestine? But when it's shouted at a secondary school teacher, you know, 400 times a day by their pupils, it becomes a hostile slogan. What can we do about it? I mean, look, there are things that university administrations can do, but the real problem is a problem of ways of thinking and political culture and scholarly culture. And it's a problem that is quite deep in our society. It's a problem that is linked to a contempt for democracy as a whole, because anti-Semitism is always linked to contempt for democracy. Anti-Semitism is always part of a political story about how the liberal state is really a fiction and is really controlled by, bad people only in their own interests, and that if there's no value to democracy and if there's no value to the democratic state, then how is anyone ever going to be able to defend it? And it really worries me that people, especially in London, students come to London from all over the world to study. And they come from many places that aren't so democratic as Britain or America. And what do we teach them? We teach them that democracy is basically fake. We teach them that democracy is really imperialism and is really racism and is really a global mode of domination and exploitation. And so in that sense, there's a very big, deep problem going on.
We've got some questions for you from our audience here, and I think they're relevant to what you're saying, obviously. So perhaps I can ask Seth Weinstein. Seth, do you want to ask your question? No?
Hello? Yes, hello.
Hi, Seth. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Put your question to David.
Yes, David, I'm thinking about the legal and financial ways to make a difference. We talked a little bit about how academia within itself can change things, but that's very difficult because now the die is somewhat cast. I mean, I went to Columbia, which is my family school. My father and mother went there, and graduate school, and et cetera. And the Columbia is a very different place than it was when I was there 57 years ago. What are the legal and financial opportunities? I know some of my friends, fellow alumni, are working on cutting off tax abatements for colleges. Some of my friends are working on the idea of cutting off contributions. There's a major movement within Jewish alumni that I know in that regard. And some of them are working on cutting off student loans, which have really bloated out the universities over the last few years. What is your view on these financial and legal strategies?
Well, I think firstly that there's a sense in which they do not impact the places that we are particularly worried about. So if Jewish donors are pulling their finance, their money from Columbia University, people on the ground, student radicals and academics will say, this goes to prove that Zionism is against the university, is against freedom of speech, is against academic freedom. Look what they're trying to do to us. They're trying to silence us. They're trying to take over. And there are many places where Columbia might go to for alternative funding. So, I mean, I don't object in principle. There are certain departments that I would certainly withdraw my funding from, but where are you who are you going to fund? And I mean, far be it from me to say that institutions like our own need funding, but we do. We need to be able to create an infrastructure of academic scholarly research. We need to pay people to get the time and the space to do research, to do teaching, to have conferences, to create the kind of scholarly community that we are excluded from, and to take all that back, to take those ideas back onto campus, not to separate ourselves from campus, but to take the fight back and to, offer a lead to some of the people who are afraid and to some of the people who know perfectly well what's going on but won't say, and to some of the other people who it's true that, for example, the fight in the Labour Party against Jeremy Corbyn, people did change their minds. Lots of them. I mean, people come to me really often and they say, oh, your book was a godsend. I read your book. I realized there was something wrong. And when I understood, I couldn't believe it. And one of the things that we see are people making that journey, kind of like, and I remember somebody saying, oh gosh, I joined the Labour Party in 2016 to support Jeremy Corbyn. And then by 2018, I realized that there was a real problem of anti-Semitism amongst his faction. And I kind of remember looking open-mouthed and thinking, why did you think in 2016 that this was a good idea? But in a sense, it doesn't matter, because people make the journey, and people, you know, we see people making the journey in front of us. We see a lot of people who stopped to think after the 7th of October. And in fact, quite a lot of Jewish anti-Zionists have really been stopped in their tracks and have felt deserted by the mainstream left. So we shouldn't be defeatist either. We should, you know, we have the best arguments and we have good understandings. And, you know, people cross the Mediterranean Sea on boats, and they cross to Florida on boats because they want to live in democratic states. And in the end, the law of democratic politics is a winner, I think. So things are bad.
It does feel like we need to do so much more, though, doesn't it? Especially under the pressure at the moment and the increase. I think it spooks people, doesn't it, when these polls show this kind of terrible increase in young people supporting a terror military like Hamas. Yep. Can I go to Jeff Donfeld? Jeff, are you there?
Thank you. Mr. Hirsh, could you offer some insights as to why, in your mind, there have not been demonstrations on any campuses anywhere around the world against the indiscriminate Russian attacks on Ukrainian civilian apartment buildings, infrastructure? Whereas, at least in the Wall Street Journal reports this morning that the UN General Assembly has a resolution to condemn Israel's military movements in the Gaza. Same situation in terms of arguably indiscriminate bombing, although we claim there are military targets within those civilian infrastructures. I haven't heard any such claim from Russia.
Sure. I mean, I suspect that is a little bit of an exaggeration. I think there has been a lot of support for Ukraine in Britain, across Europe, across America. I think there's a lot of warmth towards Ukraine, but one sees that already crumbling. One sees the kind of populisms on both sides of politics beginning to say, oh, well, it's not really our problem. And, oh, well, you know, they're each as bad as each other. And there's a real problem that when we leave Hong Kong and Ukraine and Afghanistan, when we leave democratic movements in those places unsupported, this only spreads. But yeah, having said that, there is, of course, a double standard. There is, of course, a particular readiness to ascribe all kinds of evil things to Israel. And in a way, I think it's a very old kind of anti-Semitism, that anti-Semitism has always been a way of giving a human face to the evil that you can't see, whether it be the devil or whether it be, you remember in 1984, there were in the totalitarian world that George Orwell created, there was the face of Emmanuel Goldstein, and there was 2 Minutes Hate, and the Jewish face becomes a way of visualizing the evil. And I think Israel has become a way of visualizing everything that good people hate, which is racism, genocide, apartheid, global capitalism, imperialism, etc. So I think there is a particular readiness to focus on the evils of Israel. Israel is kind of us, you know, there's a great big readiness to turn against our own states and our own governments, a way of thinking which says that really the only people with agency are our states, and our states are really bad, and they screw up the whole world, and everyone else is just a kind of victim of it. And Israel plays this strange role whereby it is us, but it's not quite us. And we can kind of hate our own democratic tradition, but we can also kind of project it off onto Zionism and onto the Jews. So it's us, but it's not quite us. And it does quite well as a place to, as a symbol of everything bad in the world.
Well, if I may, I want to follow up on my question. Pre-October 7th, but post-Russian attack on Ukraine. So anti-Semitism was not an issue at that time. The Gaza war was not on. And yet there was terrible silence on campuses throughout the world. Why?
Oh, I think anti-Semitism was an issue at the time. I think we have seen the kind of anti-Semitism that we see today. We've seen it since. I've just written a book which brings together pieces from 11 of the scholars who fought against the boycott in 2003, 4, 5. It's a kind of 20-year retrospective. It's on how anti-Semitism found a rebirth in the 21st century. So I certainly think that everything we're seeing today, we have been seeing for many years, but people have had trouble waking up to it and seeing it and noticing it and caring about it. And quite a lot of people are doing so, but, you know, most people are not.
Can I go now to, thank you, Jeff. Thank you for those questions. Can we move on to Eli Aliashmurni? Eli, are you there?
Yes, thank you.
Hello, Eli.
Good to see you, John.
And you?
I'm afraid that fighting anti-Semitism the way we're doing now is a losing battle. I expected that after October 7, people would understand that anti-Semitism is really not working for them, but it has gone exactly the opposite direction. I think it went the opposite direction because of the fact that somehow the Arab world took the initiative by putting forward Zionism is racism, and a lot follows from that. That they've gone a long way with that. Is there some kind of initiative or some kind of idea or approach that we can use to change and transform that back, the narrative? I'll just give you one example. I haven't really thought about it much. I just thought about it in the last minute. So that, for example, what if we were to have something like what the world would look like without any Jews from the beginning of time till now? If you were to say, for example, here's what your world will look like. You would not have penicillin, you would not have this, you would not have that, whatever. Would that make it different? What I'm wondering, I think we need to get the initiative, we need to get an approach that changes that, because Zionism is racism is winning for them, because young people are really decent people. I think essentially they're decent people, and they're going with their ethics and morals, and they were able to take that initiative even though for an immoral kind of approach to the world. I hope that was clear to you.
Well, I think all sorts of approaches to fighting anti-Semitism are appropriate. As I said, the one that we are particularly focused on is the one that focuses on what the top academics on campus are teaching and what they are presenting as truth and what they're presenting as cool ways to think about the world, because people go to university to create their political and their intellectual framework. And people who are journalists or civil servants or in politics, in communications, in religion, in every walk of life, they created their worldview when they were at university. And they were taught by people who have, you know, the devil has the, what is it? The devil has the best tunes. The devil has the coolest, most radical stories, and we need to challenge that. So that's the work that we're doing. We're producing.
Really, my question is, how are you doing that? My question is, how are you doing that? How are you able to change them?
Well, as I said, we need to create the infrastructure and the communities of scholarship, which people are excluded from. We are creating a book series. We've just produced our first 4 books in the last 7 or 8 months or so. And I can't tell you how important it is to produce academic books, so that when our kids or our grandkids are on campus and they want to say, for example, do you know that this anti-Zionism that you are pushing is anti-Semitic, and it has been anti-Semitic since it was invented in Moscow in the offices of the KGB in the 1950s and the 1960s, and everybody will laugh at them, but they will be able to pull out of their bag the book by Isabella Tabarovsky, who knows more about the Russian language sources than anyone else on the planet. And Isabella is writing the book, and we are going to publish the book, and they are going to use the book to write their essays. And we need the books. We need places to publish academic journal articles. Why? Because without them, you just get laughed out of the seminar, out of the conference, out of the classroom. So I'm certainly not saying that what we do is the only thing to do. There are many people, you know, like Joan, for example, politicians who specialize in shifting public opinion, which I do not. But what we do is we take on the ideas at their root, at their highest point, and we challenge them.
But that feeds the politicians as well, doesn't it, David? You've got to have this evidence base, and that's how you're going to challenge, say, the 300 to 700 academics who supported David Miller in his anti-Semitism. I'm just going to move to our last 2 questions. I'm going to ask them to both ask their question and then come back to you, David, because we've only got a few minutes. So can I ask Tom Flesch, who is our FELNET chair-elect, and then Larry Hochberg, who is our founder and current chair. So, Tom.
You are muted.
Yeah, there's also a question from Len, so let's all be brief so we can get all these questions in and then close with Jay. So go ahead, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Tom, we can.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for recognizing. I thank you for this very enlightening speech and your presentation. And Joan, it's always wonderful to hear your perspective and to lead this discussion. My frustration is that, and it came very highlighted about the how deep this anti-Semitism really is when we just heard from these 3 university presidents, prestigious universities with, you know, bright students. And you know, in my lifetime, I always felt there was a time where in a democracy there was a time to have the freedom of expressing your thoughts and exchanging ideas. And at the university level, it was really at the height of where these discussions can take place. And then you enter the working world, and sometimes these thoughts change, and they understand some of the work ethic and the privileges of freedom and what it offers. What I'm seeing now, though, and it doesn't matter to me if it's the United Nations, if universities, it's the anti-Semitic rhetoric. The problem I see now is that the latest studies indicate that model where your thoughts, you know, in life start changing after you graduate from schools and start working. It just seems right now that the group that's most supportive of Israel in this whole situation, that age group is in the late 70s or 80-year-olds. And the younger ones are now more pervasive, going up to a higher age level. And you know, how do we get engaged in teaching our young people with the education Even take, for example, ELNET. It's a wonderful organization. It has as its stated goals to strengthening the relationship and facilitating understanding between European countries and Israel. And we can do so much. We are a non-government entity. We are not political, but is there a way to start a healing process? It seems that the only process that's understood is powerful might. And this cannot be resolved with wars, ultimately. And I'm just curious if you would have, even for an organization like ELNET, like how could you see a few stated goals that you think that we should engage in within what our ability to make a difference and make progress?
Whilst David thinks about that, I'm going to go to Len Foxman, who's a FELNET board member, and then we'll have the last question from Larry, but we're going to have to be brief. Okay, Len.
Well, just pivoting off of what Tom just elucidated on, the fact is, and I want to focus on American issues here, because I think the situation in America is unique from almost every other country in the world. America wasn't bombed during World War II. We didn't suffer directly issues of having to face genocide. Eisenhower, when he took the American soldiers into the camps, he asked for all of that to be filmed and everything so that people would not believe that this was anything other than what it was. But the students who arrive at our prestigious universities today are ignorant. They don't know history. They're empty vessels, and whatever the university wants to pour into them is what they get. And this type of education, I've seen the education about what went on in German elementary schools. They know about what went on. American students don't. And so they're easily influenced. And so what can we do to get some of this history and some of this knowledge? Because the people on both sides both think they're standing for good, and the other people are standing for evil.
Thank you, Len. Thank you. Larry, sorry to give you half a minute.
I'm going to pass because we're running late, and
Okay.
I think we want to get to Jay too. So I'll pass.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, David. So the
All
answer.
right.
It's not easy.
The answers, I don't know. I mean, there is the youth movements, the synagogue youth movements, for example, have a role to play. I mean, we need to teach our kids and our grandkids to look after themselves politically and intellectually on campus. And that's tough. I mean, imagine yourselves in a debate with, I don't know who, with Judith Butler or with Norman Finkelstein. You know, there are not many people who could handle that, to be honest, in front of an audience. And we need to teach our kids to be able to do that. The problem with some of that I've seen with the youth movements is that the first thing the kids get taught is politically you are a Zionist, and the second thing they get taught is that Zionism is nearly always pretty awful. And so we kind of politically educate our kids with this kind of vacuum at the very center. There are, of course, differences across the world. Britain doesn't think of itself as having a Holocaust guilt. In fact, I heard a trade union leader once make an angry speech about being accused of BDS being anti-Semitic, and he said, "We rescued the Jews. You know, the Brits were the good guys, but Britain has colonial guilt. America has its legacy of race and racism and slavery." Germany has its legacy of the Holocaust. South Africa has apartheid. Ireland has green and orange politics. And all of these are kind of filled with, all of these fill the empty vessel of Zionism and anti-Zionism, actually. It becomes a passion play. And while it fulfills slightly different functions all over the world, in France, there was both Vichy and Algeria. So there are different patterns and different functions, but there is a lot in common. And I certainly don't think that the London Centre for the Study of Contemporary Antisemitism is a kind of parochial British organisation. I think we would like to be a hub or a bridge between the Middle East and America and Europe. And so I wouldn't get too hung up on American exceptionalism either. The anti-Zionism is a way of offering a worldview which puts the Jews as the keys to history, right? If you don't understand the Jews, you will never understand history. And if you don't understand Zionism, you'll never understand how George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, right? This becomes a worldview, an ideology. And that's when anti-Zionism becomes anti-Semitism. And I want to finish by saying that I absolutely agree that this is a struggle against people who think that they are good. And I think we need to get our heads around that. We need to understand, well, to be honest, the Nazis also thought they were good. And the kind of stereotype that we get from 1950s movies of Nazis are not really helpful. Because, you know, in the 1930s in Germany, the radical people who hated hypocrisy and who wanted radical change were often attracted to Nazism. And we need to get our heads around the fact that people who are today attracted by anti-Semitic frameworks and ideas believe themselves to be the community of the good, and they believe Zionism to be everything bad in the world. Let me just finish by thanking you very, very much for listening to me. Please find our website, which you will find on londonantisemitism.com. londonantisemitism.com, all one word, londonantisemitism.com. Have an exploration. You will find our book series, you will find our journal, you will find our efforts to create a scholarly community and a scholarly infrastructure that takes anti-Semitism seriously.
David, thank you very much indeed. I think the Centre's doing great work, very necessary. And I know your son is in the IDF, been in Gaza and been injured. So we're wishing him safe pathway through all of this. We're grateful to you. I'm handing over now to Jay Haberman, who is our Chief Development Officer. Jay, I'm sorry, a bit late handing over. It's all yours.
That's all right. That's okay. Thank you, Joan. Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. Obviously, the clock is ticking in more than one way, not just on the length of the call today. So apologize that we are a few minutes over. I hope you'll bear with me. We're hearing a lot about what's happening in Europe, and I'm going to talk about what's going on right here with Friends of ELNET. Very important. The clock is also ticking on the fact that the new year is about to come to a close. And so aside from saying very clearly our work over the period of October 7th until today has never mattered more, and Europe's support for Israel has never been more critical, we can only do this work with partners and supporters like those of you who take the time out of your busy day to be on calls like this. You are the ones who are our best ambassadors, the most educated on the issues, and I hope you will look favorably upon the next 8 business days if you've not yet made a donation, a contribution to Friends of ELNET, a tax-deductible donation, that you'll go ahead and do that. That can be done by going online. That can be done by sending in a check, the old-fashioned way, and also should I mention that we accept appreciated stock transfers. So let me just spend one more minute laying out what we plan to do in the year ahead. This has been a year of record-breaking achievement for ELNET, largely driven by the war While the war has changed a lot of things, it's also changed the intensity and the capacity and the importance of the work that we're doing. We've raised over $8.5 million this year. This is the first time in the history of the organization that we've come that far. Our goal is to raise $9 million in the next 8 business days. We have over 400 donors that have stepped forward, and I want to thank each and every one of you, not just those on the call, but those that are not here right now, for what you've done to contribute to this effort. We are going to be improving as part of our vision for 24, we are going to be dramatically looking to improve our strategic communications, using the help of professional experts who will help showcase stories and narratives and really the impact, getting that out there so that people understand that Europe should not be discarded. Europe should be embraced as a strategic asset to Israel. We want to have more visibility, particularly for our president, David Siegel, but for others. So podcasts and news media are something we intend to avail ourselves of. We are going to be looking very closely over the year to help develop a pipeline of future leaders who would maybe eventually step up into board roles. These are individuals in their 40s and 50s, primarily from the East Coast, where we don't have the same support that we enjoy in places like Los Angeles and Chicago, where we've been particularly strong since our inception. So penetrating the South Florida, Miami market is our number one development priority. And also here in New York, and that's where I am at, that's where David is at, and we definitely need to be able to spend time growing in these two areas. We will be also expanding our staff and hiring full-time professionals in New York and South Florida this year. And finally, looking to work with existing Diplomacy Club members, like many of you who are on the call. We plan on engaging our current members with more regular briefings and updates and analysis. And that would be done not just virtually, but also in person. So those are just some of the exciting initiatives that we have planned for the coming year. I really hope that you're as enthusiastic about them as I am. But like I said, we cannot do this alone. Every dollar that you will contribute to ELNET is a dollar that's going to directly go overseas to support our network of affiliates in Europe, as well as our operations in Israel. And that is because the board of directors of Friends of ELNET has contributed the amount necessary to cover all of our overhead. And that is just a tremendous thing to be able to say. We're very proud of this. And with your support, we can go further. So listen, no amount is too big or small. And I really hope that if you've enjoyed this series of, I can't imagine, over 40 calls this year, and you're a regular subscriber, please make your contribution to Friends of ELNET so that we can continue to grow. And with that, Happy New Year, and Am Yisrael Chai. Shalom.
Shalom, shalom. Thank you,
Thank you
Jay.
again.
Thank you, Joan. And of course, David, our speaker, and all our supporters. Have a happy holiday season, and we'll see you after the new year. Please continue to follow what we're doing. Be well.